In the early 80s of horror, slasher films were the king of it all. Thanks to the likes of Halloween and Friday the 13th, two little independent films that cost nothing to make but absolutely destroyed the box office, studios from all over wanted to replicate their success, and thus the slasher boom of the early 80s was born. These small budget films were raking in huge box office earnings, and audiences couldn't get enough. It was like the gold rush, and every studio wanted a piece of the pie. Now, due to the high volume of these movies being pushed out, the bubble would eventually burst and audiences were burnt out by the mid to late 80s, leaving the slasher genre to die. And even though these early 80s slashers basically couldn't fail, not every early 80s slasher was a hit. Basically, the worst case scenario was studios were at least guaranteed to make their money back. Low risk, super high reward. One such film that seemingly failed at the box office was 1982's Pranks. It only cost $150,000 to make, and it still failed so hard that the distributors pulled it from cinemas. They renamed it to The Dorm That Dripped Blood and re-released it in 1983. Under this new title, the film basically earned back its budget. The film would have been a small blimp, it would have been forgotten forever, and no one would remember it except for one scene. One small scene that saved the movie and made it worth remembering. That one scene was so violent that the UK ended up putting The Dorm That Dripped Blood on the Video Nasty List. The Video Nasty List was the UK's way of banning films of a graphic nature. Well, when you ban or drastically alter a film, more people want to see said film. By putting The Dorm That Dripped Blood on the Video Nasty List, the UK forever cemented this slasher's legacy and made it more popular than it ever could have been. If The Dorm That Dripped Blood was on the UK's Video Nasty List, then it must be full of horror goodness. Right? Well, it's not always the case, so let's pop the disc in and see if The Dorm That Dripped Blood is worth the watch or not. Welcome to the HellBound Horror Show. Now, normally I like to go into these reviews pretty blind. I like to watch movies that I haven't seen before or have heard little about and share my thoughts with the community, but I've actually seen The Dorm That Drips Blood. I watched it in 2019 with hopes of doing a review on it back when my channel was in its infancy. I had nothing positive to say about it at the time and didn't write a single word. I thought it was pretty bad, but since then I've watched a lot of really bad movies, so I feel like I'm a lot more forgiving now. So I'm excited to see this early 80s slasher in a brand new light. The Dorm That Dripped Blood starts with some random guy running around at night. He hides in some bushes, is strangled, and then his hand is cut open. It's a great little opening, although it serves no point to the plot outside of showcasing some special effects by Academy Award winner Matthew Mungle, but more on him later. We are then introduced to some of our main characters at a party. We meet Joanne, our final girl, a hard-working, responsible young adult who is in charge of tearing down an old dormitory during Christmas break with a few friends. This means we'll have disposable teens in a large, isolated area. That's good enough for me. I mean, it's a slasher movie after all. What more could you want? For those of you with a keen eye, much of the film was shot at UCLA. This was technically a student film by first-time directors Stephen Carpenter and Jeffrey Obrow. Stephen mostly took over cinematography, while Jeffrey was more of the directing force. These two would work together again on The Power and The Kindred. Unfortunately, Joanne's friend Debbie has to return home, so she's not going to be able to help clean up. Debbie is played by Daphne Zuniga, who has gone on to become a pretty decent name, but I know her from 1984's The Initiation, which I've covered before. Shameless plug. As Debbie's parents come to pick her up, an unknown assailant attacks. The dad gets it bad with a bat to the head. The mom gets piano wire around the neck, and Debbie gets run over. It's a pretty good sequence and it adds to the body count early. In the morning, we get to meet all the students that are staying to help tear down the dorm. All 4 of them, including Joanne. Don't they have to take out like 100 beds and 100 desks?
We have to clean the place up. Clear out the beds, the desks, the kitchen equipment, the surplus food, and then board it all up.
In 2 weeks? 4 of them? Somehow the math isn't adding up on this one. Well, these 4 aren't the only ones around. We have the weird, dumpster diving John Hammett. We have the less weird, but still weird, dumpster diving Bobby Lee Treble, who's around to buy the tables. Both are very weird, just one a little less so, and they give off some creepy vibes. We also have the caretaker, Bill, who is upset that his drill is missing.
My best drill. You can't get them like that anymore. Christ, if somebody wants to borrow it...
Wait a minute, Bill. Did you see who took it?
Ooh, foreshadowing. Well, someone is creeping around and spooking our 4 students. And then we have a lot of scenes of just people walking around. Even the directors ripped the film for the pointless walking. They both would go back and re-edit the film to make the pacing a bit tighter. And I agree. The walking is a bit much. Well, eventually, someone finds the caretaker's missing drill, and this is the scene that is infamous and got the Dorm That Dripped Blood on the Video Nasties list. The UK would eventually cut that scene down to pieces, but here on the Synapse Blu-ray, it's restored to its full glory. It's a pretty great kill, and the makeup effects by Matthew Mungle are pretty gnarly. Mungle would go on to work on over 250 movies, some of which are the director's next 2 films, The Power and The Kindred. My friend Steve from Retro Analog Entertainment did a great review on The Kindred, so check out his review for more on that one. Mungle would be part of a team that would win an Academy Award for their work on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Now get the thing out of my eye.
Who is behind these killings? Will the dorm drip with blood? Will the students figure it out before it's too late? Who will survive? And most importantly, who cares? Ultimately, the Dorm That Dripped Blood is just boring and bare. That is, until you get to the final act. The last third of the movie is actually really great. It's entertaining, fast-paced, tense, and done well. Outside of the drill scene, the ending is the best bit in the whole movie. The ending isn't as great or as memorable as Sleepaway Camps or Friday the 13th's ending, but it's still pretty darn good. I won't spoil it, but The Dorm That Dripped Blood is worth watching for the ending alone. Outside of the ending, what are some other positives for the movie? Well, directors Stephen Carpenter and Jeffrey Obrow do a fine job for first-time directors. There's a dolly shot, decent framing, and fairly good attention to detail. The movie looks pretty good for being shot on 16mm. Sure, it's underlit most of the movie, but it's not unbearable. The music is great, being composed by Christopher Young, who is an established composer who worked on over 100 films. Special effects and makeup are pretty solid as well. Not enough in my opinion, but what we do get is pretty great. For a movie that costs $150,000, it looks and sounds darn good. It's really impressive, but is it perfect? God, no. The pacing is horrendous. There's a lot of boring bits of walking. It really needed to be tighter, but the directors have said in a commentary that they needed free shots. Free shots as there wasn't a budget to add more to the story, so they just shot people walking around. It's a way to add to the runtime without adding to the budget. Being labeled a video nasty carries some weight to it. It's a forbidden list, so there's a natural appeal. And while there are many great video nasties out there, unfortunately, The Dorm That Dripped Blood isn't one of them. Outside of a great final act and a drill scene, it's hard to praise this one. The Dorm That Dripped Blood comes recommended to die-hard slasher enthusiasts and video nasty completionists only. Everyone else, you're probably safe to skip this one. And that's all I have for tonight, so thank you so much for watching, and stay spooky, everyone.